of you have learning centers in your classroom? Yay! What is your children's favorite center? Blocks. What else? The home living, kitchen, yeah. Another? Sensory? Mm-hmm. Nature center. Same everywhere I go. I guess the block center is the most popular. Home living. Home living is safe. So for children who come into the program less familiar with the program or the children there, they like to go to home living or Wendy's Corner or whatever you want to call it. There's lots of different names. In England, they call it the Wendy Center from Peter Pan. So there's lots of different names for it. But as I told you this morning, and I think I mentioned, how many of you were with me during the directors' meeting? I guess just a few of you. I'm going to tell you this story because if there's only one, it will be hearing it again. How I got interested in learning centers. When I became the lab school director, I was also teaching 5 master's level courses in early childhood on the side. And so it was kind of a hairy first year. And I went into the child study lab school where I was to be the director on a part-time basis, which if any of you have ever tried to be a director part-time, it doesn't work very well. So I actually had 2 full-time jobs. That's what it amounted to. And I walked into the room, and the first day that I was to observe there, I'd been there before, but only just physically looking at the center. And in the room that was probably from here over, this size, this big. And they referred to it as the big room, which I thought was very appropriate, since it was a very large room. There was very little there for the children to do. There was no centers. There was a few activities and things, but they were around the wall. And so I walk in and I look at this space that I have newly acquired as being their director. There are 75 little children there. 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. 75. There are 8 adults with varying levels of training. Are you hearing me okay? It seems like I'm having a... You're okay? Okay. It sounds funny to my ears. So there's 8 adults and 75, and the teachers, the 8 of them, are varying different levels of training. Some people are just starting out, haven't had any courses in early childhood, and then there's people who have master's degrees. But there's 8 teachers in the space. Come on in, ladies. And I walk into this space, and I'm horrified, absolutely horrified. You know as well as I do, if you put 75 little children in a space with not much to do, what happens? They're very creative. And they find all kinds of interesting things to do. And so there were some climbing on the few bookcases that were there. There were some who had made it to a little block area that had about 15 blocks in it. And they were throwing those in the floor because there's not enough to build with. And the rest of them were running back and forth, back and forth. And I'm standing there with my head, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This is Zoo City, and I'm in charge. And I thought, there has to be a better way, there has to be. So in my preparation stage, as we talked about this morning, I read everything I could about how you take 75 children and make a room work for them. And the first thing that I read about in lots of literature that was just beginning to come out was that children work best in small groups. 75 is, I think, not a small group. And so I thought immediately, we're going to have to do things differently. Because 75 children trying to do in this space, it's just not working. And the teachers were there, who really lovely teachers, really, some of them really very talented teachers. So, they just didn't have the leadership or it just wasn't working. And one of them, one of my curses is that when I feel a way, it shows up on my face. I try really hard that it not, but I can't do much about it. If I'm feeling upset, it's on my face. And they all look at me, and they realize that I'm feeling rather panicked at that moment. And one of them says to me, "But we have a good adult-child ratio." They did. 8 into 75. It's a decent, with multi-age, 3, 4, and 5s. That's a decent ratio. The problem is that there were 75 of them. And it didn't matter how many adults you had in it. When you have 75 children in one room, the noise level is huge. And to make it all that much worse, there was linoleum floor and cement walls. And so when they spoke, it would hit the floor and bounce up on the wall and bounce back again and up another wall and up another and multiplied by 15 times. And so what we had was a monstrously loud environment. So after I started reading and studying about small groups, I became very interested in learning centers. And the wonderful teachers who were there and I worked together in developing learning centers that were appropriate for preschool children. And the Complete Book of Learning Centers came from that work. And it was, all of the centers were field tested in that area. Teachers wrote about them and we improved them and tried to make them better. So that's how I got interested in learning centers. Before that, I knew nothing about learning centers. And I found that one of the interesting things was that when that book came out, there was really very little written about learning centers. And so it kind of came into the market at the time when it was, appropriate and needed. And then, I guess 5 years ago, I was asked to do a revision and update it. And so I've still continued to be interested in learning centers and write about learning centers. So what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit of background about why small groups work best. I'm going to go through that pretty quickly, so running shoes. And then when we get into the centers, I'll slow down a little bit and talk to you about them as we go along. My goal is that when we finish, you're going to get some ideas about some new centers. Maybe think about the centers you already have and how can you improve them. And then at the end, hopefully pull all this together. Would you mind, ma'am, would you mind being my timer? Do you have a watch? You have a clock, you have a phone. Would you let me know when it's 5 minutes before 3 so I will know to kind of start pulling back together? Go. Okay, thank you. All right. Learning centers. Oops. In any environment that we are planning for children, we first have to ask ourselves, who is living in this space? Because an infant and toddler room will be very different from a multi-age preschool. So we have to think about the children who are going to be in this space. So first thing that we need to think about is, what is their level of cognition? What level of thinking do they have? And that will help us determine how that environment should be. What kind of personal experiences do they have? One of the things about early childhood is we have a range of experiences in the same classroom. We'll have one child who has been around the world, and they know what a passport is. And in that same classroom is a child who has never been out of the neighborhood and may have never even been to a grocery store. And they are in this same classroom together. And as early childhood educators, we have to figure out how to match what we're doing with this wide range of experiences. The next thing, we know that it needs to be active. These are not little children who are going to sit around a table and be quiet and follow directions. They have to be active. That's how they learn. They have to move their bodies. I have a good friend who's a school psychologist, and he got a call from a school, a private school, that said, we have a little boy here that we think has attention deficit disorder, and we'd like for you to come and observe him. He's 5. So my friend goes to the school where he is in school, and he spends the day with him. He observes him from early in the morning through lunch and through the afternoon, and he comes back. And when he gets back, I said, well, Wes, tell me about the little boy. How was he, and what did you observe? And he said to me, and I want you to remember this, there's not a 5-year-old boy in the world who would not be hyperactive in that classroom. And he said he's a good kid, and he was trying so hard to do what he was supposed to. And the first hour, he was really good at it. He sat there and smiled and took the world in. And the second hour, he was getting a little restless. And his arm would move. And then his other arm would move. And then his whole body would move. And by the third hour, he was under the table. And he was hitting on the underneath part of the table. And you can imagine how the rest of the day went. Downhill from there. Was he hyperactive? The environment was inappropriate for him because he was an active pre-operational learner, and he was being asked to be quiet and still for long periods of time. And he wanted to. He really wanted to, but his body just wouldn't let him because he kept moving and jumping and responding, because that's what bodies do when you try to keep them too still. Have you ever tried to sit still and not move? Really hard, isn't it? I can remember sitting in church with my mama trying to be so still. Can you remember that? And there were 3 looks that I got. The first one, I knew I was in trouble because it was like, and the second one was the sigh. The third one was pinching. Now, I never did quite understand that one because she would pinch me, and then when I said, "You're pinching me," she was mad at me. I never quite understood that, because why would you pinch somebody if you didn't want them to say, "You're pinching me"? But that was the last straw. And I got picked up and carried out of church very quickly. But there's nothing worse than trying to be still when your body just won't let you. And how many little children do we have in classrooms like that? And then they get labeled, they get identified as being problematic, when really it's the environment. Because the environment sets up where you're going to be, what you're going to be, how you're going to be acting, how your day is going to go, and how the experiences around you are happening. So part of it is materials. Do you have interesting materials that will capture young children? What we know about materials is that children are captured by novelty. They like novel items, and that means items they haven't seen all the time. So if you have a group of materials on the table and you bring in something new that they've never seen before, what are they going to be drawn to? The new one. Because they're interested in novelty. And it's also very interesting, it says a lot about their brain power, that they can pick that one out. They know it's new. They know they haven't seen it before. And what is the first thing that they must do? They must explore it. And how do little children explore? Tell me loud. They got to touch it. What else? Mouth it. What else? Smell it. What else? Roll it around, throw it down. They have to explore it. And I see more activities bomb out because the teacher brings in something new for them they've never explored before. And she says, "Oh, today we're going to make a picture of our families. We're going to cut out pictures of the magazine and we're going to glue it on the page." I haven't seen a magazine before. Oh, magazine. And so they proceed to explore the magazine. They aren't interested in gluing anything on the page. What they're interested in is exploring the material. So when you bring out a new material with them, you must always remember and think like a little child. Before you can do anything with it, you gotta explore it. Then the next day or later in the day, I can do something with it. But first, I gotta explore it. Every day should be filled with some successes. One of the ways that children build their confidence is that they feel good about something they've done. I built a skyscraper bigger than I've ever built before. It's taller than you. I must be really good. Sometimes challenges. Oh, this looks a little different. I don't know if I can put that together or not. Challenges. Every environment must match the language and interactions of the children. In Tennessee and in probably 38 other states in the United States, and I don't know the statistics in Texas, but I would say it's probably similar. The most frequent area of representation for special needs is language delayed. And that is not because the child is unable to structure the language. It is that the child has not learned or communicated with language. And they have often come from a home where children are to be seen and not heard. So they have not been involved in conversations or interactions, and their language has not grown in the way it should. And then the last one, we must always treasure and celebrate the culture and the experiences of the children you're working with, because that is who they are, and we must celebrate that. We had a terrible piece of history where the Cherokee Indians, who lived in North Carolina, not far from where I live, were transported or had to move from the mountains of North Carolina to Oklahoma. You may have heard about them, the Trail of Tears, where many children were, or many adults and families were moved, and lots of families died and were not able to survive to the end. And that culture, one of the things that we did in the United States, which none of us should be proud of, is that we tried to make them white. And we tried to educate those children to dress and act like white. What a disservice. Because they had such a wonderful, rich culture, but that was not celebrated. We know better now. And we know that it's important that we celebrate the culture of every child. Now, what are some of the benefits of small groups? And I'm going to go through this really quick because I know you want to see the centers. Every center should have an opportunity for the children to communicate. Where do you learn language? By using